The departure board at Edinburgh Airport flickered with increasingly pessimistic updates as Sean Connery stood before it, reading the same disheartening information for the third time in 20 minutes. His 2:15 p.m. flight to London had been delayed first to 4:30, then to 6:45, and now showed the ominous delayed message that every experienced traveler knew meant trouble. At 78, Sean had developed a philosophical approach to travel disruptions, understanding that rage and frustration accomplish nothing except raising one's blood pressure. He adjusted his leather carry-on bag and made his way toward the gate area, hoping to find a comfortable chair where he could settle in with the biography of Churchill he'd brought for exactly such circumstances. The terminal was experiencing the particular chaos that comes with widespread weather delays. Storm Moira had settled over the British Isles with the persistence of an unwanted house guest, grounding flights and stranding thousands of passengers across the country. The gate area resembled a refugee camp with travelers sprawled across every available surface, surrounded by luggage, laptops, and the resigned expressions of people who had already passed through the 5 stages of travel grief. Sean found an empty seat in a row near the windows and had just opened his book when he became aware of a conversation taking place at the seats directly across from him. A family of 4, parents in their early 30s and 2 young children, were engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly tense discussion about their situation. The agent said the earliest they can get us out is tomorrow morning, the father was saying, his voice carrying the strained patience of someone who had been delivering bad news for the past several hours. If we're lucky. But we're supposed to be at Sarah's wedding rehearsal dinner tonight, the mother replied, her voice tight with stress. I'm her maid of honor. I can't miss it. Mummy, I'm hungry, piped up the younger child, a girl who looked to be about 6 years old with tangled blonde hair and chocolate stains on her purple dress. We just ate, sweetheart, the mother replied automatically, her attention still focused on the larger crisis. That was airplane peanuts 4 hours ago, the father pointed out. And that was before we got stuck here. Sean observed the family with the unconscious attention to detail that had served him well throughout his acting career. The father, tall and lanky with prematurely receding hair, wore the rumpled business casual of someone who traveled frequently, but wasn't enjoying this particular journey. The mother, petite with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail that was slowly losing its structure, clutched her phone like a lifeline while juggling a diaper bag that seemed to contain the contents of a small pharmacy. The children presented an interesting contrast. The 6-year-old girl was clearly reaching the end of her patience reserves, fidgeting in her seat and casting increasingly dramatic sighs toward the ceiling. Her older brother, perhaps 8 or 9, sat quietly with a handheld gaming device, apparently immune to the family crisis unfolding around him. Look, the father continued, lowering his voice, but not quite enough to prevent Sean from overhearing. I'll call the hotel, see if they can extend our reservation. Maybe we can get on the first flight tomorrow and still make it to the ceremony. The ceremony is at 11, the mother replied. Even if we get the first flight out, we won't have time to get ready and the kids will be exhausted. I'm not exhausted, protested the little girl. I'm bored and hungry, and I want to go home. John found himself unable to concentrate on Churchill's wartime memoirs. The family's predicament was playing out with the kind of real-world drama that made fictional stories seem tame by comparison. More than that, he recognized something in the parents' faces, the particular stress that comes not just from inconvenience, but from the fear of disappointing people you love. Excuse me, Sean said, closing his book and leaning slightly forward. I couldn't help but overhear. You're trying to get to a wedding. The parents looked up with the cautious expression of people who weren't sure whether a stranger's interest was welcome or intrusive. Yes, the mother replied hesitantly. My sister's wedding in London tomorrow. We've been planning this trip for months. I'm David Carter, the father said, extending his hand with the automatic politeness of someone accustomed to networking. This is my wife, Emma, and these are our children, Sophie and Michael. Sean Connery, Sean replied, accepting the handshake. And I'm in exactly the same boat. Supposed to be in London this evening for a dinner I'd rather not miss. Sophie, the 6-year-old, looked up with sudden interest. Are you really Sean Connery? Like the real one? Sean smiled. I'm afraid I'm the only Sean Connery I know how to be. Cool, Sophie exclaimed, her boredom momentarily forgotten. You James Bond. Michael, this is James Bond. Michael glanced up from his game with the practiced indifference of a 9-year-old who had been taught not to bother famous people. Hello, he said politely before returning to his screen. Sorry, Emma said quickly. We don't usually let them pester strangers. No pestering detected, Sean assured her. In fact, I was wondering if you might be interested in some company during our shared exile. Misery loves company and all that. David and Emma exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that passes between long married couples. That's very kind, David said carefully, but we don't want to impose. Nonsense. I was about to wander in search of decent coffee anyway. Might as well have some companions for the expedition. What followed was an impromptu migration to the terminal's main cafe, where Sean insisted on buying coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for the children. As they settled around a small table, surrounded by their accumulated luggage, the conversation began to flow with the easy familiarity that shared adversity can create between strangers. So, what's the wedding situation? Sean asked as Sophie carefully excavated marshmallows from her hot chocolate with surgical precision. My sister Sarah, Emma explained, her voice carrying both affection and exasperation. She's been planning this wedding for 2 years. Every detail has been orchestrated down to the minute. The rehearsal dinner tonight is supposed to be this intimate family gathering where everyone shares stories and toasts. And you're the maid of honor? Exactly. Which means I'm supposed to give a speech about growing up with Sarah, about how perfect she is for her fiance, about how much this day means to all of us. Emma's voice wavered slightly. Instead, I'm going to be the sister who couldn't even make it to the rehearsal dinner because she was trapped in an airport. Mummy's been crying, Sophie announced matter-of-factly, then immediately covered her mouth as if she'd revealed a state secret. Sophie, Emma protested, her cheeks flushing. It's okay, Sean said gently. Airports make everyone cry eventually. It's practically a requirement for frequent travelers. David leaned back in his chair with a rueful laugh. The thing is, this isn't just about missing a party. Emma and her sister, they haven't always had the easiest relationship. Sarah's always been the organized one, the one who has everything figured out. Emma's more spontaneous. I'm a mess, Emma said flatly. Let's just be honest about it. Sarah plans everything months in advance, and I barely remember to pay bills on time. She's marrying a successful lawyer, and I married a teacher who coaches Little League on weekends. Hey, David protested mildly. I didn't mean it as an insult, Emma clarified quickly. I love that you coach Little League. I love our life. But Sarah's always seen me as the baby sister who can't get her act together, and missing her rehearsal dinner because of a weather delay is just going to confirm every suspicion she's ever had. Sean studied Emma's face, recognizing something familiar in her expression, the particular pain that comes from feeling like a disappointment to family members whose approval matters deeply. May I ask you something? Sean said carefully. Sure. What would you say to your sister tonight if you could, if weather and flights and logistics weren't an issue? What would your speech have been about? Emma was quiet for a moment, absently stirring her coffee while Sophie and Michael engaged in a quiet argument about the optimal marshmallow to chocolate ratio. I would have told her about the time when we were kids, Emma said slowly. When I was maybe 7 and she was 12, I was sick with pneumonia, really sick, and my parents were terrified. Sarah stayed home from school for a week to take care of me. She read to me, brought me soup, slept on the floor next to my bed because I was scared to be alone. Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued. Everyone always talks about how organized and successful Sarah is, but they forget that she's also the most genuinely caring person I've ever known. She doesn't just plan perfect weddings. She's the person who shows up when you need her, who remembers your birthday every year, who calls just to check in even when life gets crazy. That's beautiful, Sean said quietly. And I would have told her that marrying James isn't just good for her. It's good for him too, because he's getting someone who will make sure he never feels alone or forgotten or unimportant. She has this way of making people feel seen. It sounds like you understand your sister pretty well, Sean observed. I do, which is why it kills me that I'm going to miss this, because Sarah would never miss something important to me. She'd find a way to be there, even if it meant driving through a blizzard or chartering a private plane. But you're not missing it by choice, David pointed out. It's a weather delay. She'll understand that. Will she, though? Emma asked. Or will she just see it as more evidence that I can't be counted on when it matters? Sean was quiet for several minutes, watching this family navigate their crisis with a combination of love, frustration, and genuine concern for each other. Sophie had moved on from marshmallow archaeology to creating elaborate sculptures with sugar packets, while Michael had temporarily abandoned his game to help with her architectural endeavors. Can I tell you something? Sean said finally, about disappointing family members. Emma nodded. When I was about 40, my mother became seriously ill. Cancer. She was living in Edinburgh. And I was in the middle of filming in Morocco. Complicated shoot, couldn't be easily replaced, studio contracts, all the usual industry complications. Sean paused, remembering. I told myself I'd fly home as soon as we wrapped the current sequence. Just a few more days, but film schedules have a way of expanding, and those few days turned into 2 weeks. What happened? Emma asked quietly. She died while I was still in Morocco. I missed her final days, missed saying goodbye, missed being there when she needed me most. Sean's voice was steady, but Emma could see the pain in his eyes. And for years, I carried that guilt. I was convinced I'd failed her, that my career had made me a terrible son. But you were working, David said. You had obligations. That's what I told myself, but the truth was more complicated. I wasn't just honoring professional obligations, I was also scared. Scared of watching her die, scared of feeling helpless, scared of confronting my own mortality through hers. Sean looked directly at Emma. The difference between your situation and mine is that you're not choosing career over family. You're not avoiding anything difficult or frightening. You're simply the victim of circumstances beyond your control. But what if Sarah doesn't see it that way? Then you'll explain it to her. You'll tell her exactly what you just told me, about how much she means to you, about the speech you wanted to give, about how desperately you wished you could be there. Sean smiled slightly. And if she's half the person you've described, she'll understand that your presence isn't what makes your love real. Sophie, who had been listening with the shameless eavesdropping skills of a 6-year-old, suddenly looked up from her sugar packet architecture. Why don't you just call her and tell her now? The adults stared at Sophie with the stunned recognition that sometimes the most obvious solutions come from the most unexpected sources. Out of the mouths of babes, Sean murmured. She's right, David said slowly. You could call Sarah right now, tell her what happened, give her the speech you wanted to give at the dinner. Emma pulled out her phone, then hesitated. It's not the same as being there. No, Sean agreed, but it's something, and sometimes something is enough. What if she's busy? What if I'm interrupting rehearsal preparation? What if she's sitting somewhere worried that you've changed your mind about coming? Sean countered. What if she needs to hear from you as much as you need to talk to her? Emma stared at her phone for another moment, then stood up abruptly. I'm going to call her, but not here. Too noisy. I'll be right back. She disappeared toward a quieter area of the terminal, leaving Sean alone with David and the children. Thank you, David said quietly. She's been beating herself up about this for hours. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see things clearly. Sometimes it takes a 6-year-old to point out the obvious, Sean replied, winking at Sophie. Are you really James Bond? Sophie asked again, as if she still couldn't quite believe it. I played James Bond in some movies, Sean explained, but that was pretend. In real life, I'm just a person who gets stuck in airports like everyone else. But you must be brave, Sophie insisted. James Bond is very brave. Sean considered this seriously. You know what I've learned about bravery? It's not about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. Like Mummy calling Aunt Sarah even though she's nervous. Exactly like that. They waited in comfortable silence, punctuated by Michael's gaming sounds and Sophie's ongoing architectural projects. When Emma returned 15 minutes later, her eyes were red, but her expression was transformed. How did it go? David asked. She cried, Emma said, settling back into her chair. She said she'd been checking her phone every 5 minutes, worried something terrible had happened, and when I told her about being stuck here, she said she was just grateful we were safe. Did you give her the speech? Sean asked. a version of it. I told her about the pneumonia story, told her how proud I am of her, how perfect she and James are together. Emma wiped her eyes with a napkin, and she told me something I didn't expect. She said she'd been nervous about the speech she was supposed to give about me tomorrow. Apparently, she was worried she wouldn't be able to express how much it meant to her that I was willing to travel with two small children just to be at her wedding. So you were both worried about disappointing each other, David observed. Exactly. And the funny thing is, talking to her on the phone, being honest about the situation instead of trying to fix everything, it felt more real than any rehearsed speech would have been. Sophia looked up from her sugar packet castle. So everything's okay now? Everything's okay, Emma confirmed. We'll still try to make it to the ceremony tomorrow, but even if we don't, Sarah knows we love her and we're thinking about her. Sean felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the satisfaction that comes from witnessing people find their way through difficulty to something better than they'd started with. You know what this reminds me of? Sean said. Something my director once told me during a particularly challenging film. He said that the best performances don't come from perfect circumstances. They come from finding authenticity in the middle of chaos. Is that what we did? Emma asked. Found authenticity in the middle of chaos? I think you found something better than that. You found out that love doesn't require perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It just requires honesty and the courage to reach out when reaching out feels difficult. 3 hours later, when their flight was finally called, the Carter family and Sean boarded together, their shared ordeal having created an unexpected friendship. Emma had spoken to Sarah twice more, sharing details about the terminal, about Sean, which had caused considerable excitement among the bridal party, and about how sometimes the most meaningful conversations happen in the most unlikely places. Thank you, Emma said as they settled into their seats, for the coffee, for the advice, for helping me remember that being present isn't just about physical presence. Thank you for reminding me that some of life's most important moments happen in departure lounges when all our plans fall apart and we have to figure out what really matters. Sophie, buckled in beside her mother, tugged on Sean's sleeve as the plane began to taxi. Mr. Connery, will you be at the wedding tomorrow? I don't think so, sweetheart. I'll be at my own family dinner. But you'll remember us. Sean smiled, understanding that this 6-year-old had somehow grasped something essential about human connection, that the moments we share with strangers who become friends, however briefly, are often the ones that stay with us longest. I'll remember all of you, he promised. And I'll remember that sometimes the best adventures happen when you're just trying to get somewhere else. The next day, Sean would receive a text message with a photo attached. Emma and her family at Sarah's wedding, having made it just in time for the ceremony after catching the first flight out that morning. In the photo, Emma was giving a speech that, according to the accompanying message, was completely different from what I planned, but somehow exactly what needed to be said. 6 months later, Sean would receive a wedding invitation in the mail for David's sister's wedding with a handwritten note. We'd love for you to be our intentional airport friend this time instead of our accidental one. It wasn't just a flight delay, it was the reminder that sometimes our worst moments create the conditions for our best connections, and that the people we meet when life goes sideways are often the ones who help us discover what we're actually made of.